I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum!
Astro Radio Z is a horror, cult, exploitation film podcast by filmmakers, critics, musicians, journalists, and fans for the film obsessed. Here is your host, Derek Carey.
Why, hello, my friends, and welcome to this intriguing episode of Astro Radio Z. My name is Baron Martino, and I host a little show called The Giallo Room. Mr. Derek Carey asked me to come on and explain to the uninitiated what Giallo is. Giallo is basically the Italian word for yellow, that often referred to cheap mystery novels with yellow covers published by Mondadori in Italy back in the 1920s and beyond. However, it became the namesake of a notorious genre of films that peaked in the early 70s after Mario Bava, Dario Argento, Lucio Fulci, Sergio Martino, and many other talented Italian filmmakers introduced audiences to a style of film that incorporated ornate cinematography, a pulsating soundtrack, a black glove killer, and a thrilling twist ending. Join us today as we discuss some films from the world of Giallo. Here now is your host, Mr. Derek Carey.
Welcome to another episode of Astro Radio Z, folks, and thank you, Mr. Martino. I appreciate you introducing the show and coming on your show. I'm a huge fan of the Giallo Room. Folks, listeners of Astro Radio Z, if you aren't a fan, you haven't subscribed to the Giallo Room channel on YouTube, go over and do so and give Mr. Baron Martino some love. So, without further ado, we're going to get to the episode tonight on Giallo films because I've been a huge fan for a long, long time. I'm a big fan of Italian cinema in general, horror cinema, that is. My obsession with it mostly started with Dario Argento and his films, Deep Red and The Bird with the Crystal Plumage and Terror at the Opera and stuff like that. But then once I got involved with some friends of mine on an old website called infinitropolis.com, I kind of fell down the rabbit hole. Once you start with one, there's so many of them, and they're so exotic and so weird and kind of sleazy and kind of dreamlike. They're kind of addicting. And there's a lot of them out there. In the span of a short period of time, a lot of them were produced. So I have somebody on my panel tonight that was actually part of that old website, infinitropolis.com, Mr. Seth Powlin. He was part of the people that got me really into Giallo film back in the day. Seth, how you doing tonight?
I'm good. That is a fantastic trip down memory lane for Infinitropolis.
Yeah, you remember that? We used to have the horror draft, remember, on old Bloody Disgusting boards?
Yeah.
Did we ever do the Giallo draft?
I think we tried, and there was only about 5 or 6 people that signed up.
So what that is, listeners, is back in the day, we're talking early 2000s when Bloody Disgusting first started. That's where I met Seth. There used to be these, I think once a year we would hold a horror draft where it's kind of like fantasy football but with horror films, where each of the contestants would go through 10 rounds and everyone would pick films, and then you would go up against other people in the message boards to see who had the best list of horror films. And I never got fucking close. I never even. How did you end up doing, Seth? I don't remember.
I got to the semifinals once in the semifinals, and nobody had seen The Church, which was my big round 10 pick, and that ended up costing me.
Yeah, I remember back in the day, if you didn't have films that everyone knew, you were fucked. If you brought in any of the little kind of obscure, kind of sleazy stuff, nobody knew that. You're talking about Bloody Disgusting. They know Child's Play 2, and they know Friday the 13th Part 6, and that's about it. Why don't you tell me a little bit, how did you get into Giallo films?
I guess I was a late bloomer in Euro horror, I guess, as far as horror fans are concerned. I was probably about 18, and I discovered Suspiria thanks to one of those horror Halloween countdowns, like top 100 horror movies of all time. And I saw a clip from Suspiria that got me into Euro horror and quickly dug further into that. And it led me to the Giallo films of Argento, and that just opened up a shitstorm of 8 years or so of wild Giallo filmmaking.
Like I said, once you see one and once you seem to get a taste for it, there's so much of it. It is literally like falling down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, you can really just find a new one for every day of the year and go 10 years and not watch the same one.
Yeah, so many. And the titles are so wild.
That's part of the allure.
And those posters.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're all great. And next to Seth is a good friend of mine. You've heard him before on Astro Radio Z back on the 31 Days of Horror Challenge episode of last year, Mr. Eric Arsnow. How you doing, sir?
Great, thanks. How's it going with you?
Oh, it's going great. We're finally doing this Giallo episode that I've been talking about. Most of the time this year, I've been talking about all these crappy-ass paranormal fucking movies. It's about time we start talking about some decent shit.
Yeah, I'm actually really excited to be on this episode. Kind of similar to Seth, the first one that got me introduced to the whole genre was Suspiria, based on the exact same thing, a list. I remember buying it off of eBay randomly, not really knowing what I was getting into. And I think the biggest thing I respond to with the genre across the board is just the interesting camera techniques and cinematography and especially music that all these films seem to carry. It's just super awesome stuff.
Mario Bava and Dario Argento are kind of like the grandfathers of this genre. Like once they did their films, the rest of the films kind of took that as the mold, you know.
Right.
The first one I remember ever seeing was Deep Red. And that's a very striking film. Dario Argento was at the peak of his game at that point. So after those films all came out, pretty much Bird with the Crystal Plumage is considered the film that, broke the genre wide open.
Yeah,
and
I could see that.
After that point, all the rest of the films kind of like took that as the template and ran with it.
Well, and not only that, but I feel like a lot of people tried working under Argento and Bava to get a little bit of that insight, how to make giallos the way they did, just because they were so striking.
And it was also a matter of the soundtracks that were involved too that kind of made those films feel the way they did. It was that mixture of beatnik hipster music and kind of shuffle jazz and progressive rock and weird abstract music. It was so strange. It felt diametrically opposed to what was going on the screen, but at the same time kind of put it into this weird dream world. What did you always think about those soundtracks that were on these films?
Yeah, that's one of the things that really drew me to a lot of them. Especially we were talking a little bit about Dario's film for Flies on Grey Velvet, and that one is total like acid jazz. But yeah, the thing that's kind of interesting too is I feel like these are some of the first films that really started taking these types of like musical styles into consideration with how they're working with the picture really well. There's definitely some sparseness where they just, leave it up to the dialogue to carry things, but kind of add in the music when it's really needed.
One of the things that, at least with Argento, when he made films, he was never super concerned with the story per se, but more the mood that was created. And the music always accentuated that dreamlike state that he liked his films to be in. Because at the core, the films are all murder mysteries.
Yes, yeah.
But for some reason, these Italian directors decided to make them into like acid dreams.
Yeah.
So it's a very strange subgenre of horror. And last but not least, the man who curates the Giallo room, one of my good friends, the biggest Giallo fan I've ever met in my entire life, Mr. Brian Martinez. Thank you for coming back. You heard him on the 50th episode of Astro Radio Z, a rather weird introduction for him on a 5-hour episode where I'm sure he got buried at the very ass end of that episode. But finally, I'm bringing him on the episode he was meant to be on Astro Radio Z. Brian, thank you for coming.
Well, thank you so much for that kind intro. I mean, Giallo is like, I guess, my life. You know, and I realize that's a little sick to say, but I love these films so much. So I watched my very first Giallo unsuspectingly when I was a kid. Actually, I walked in and my uncle was watching. I didn't know it back then, but years later when I rediscovered the film, I was like, oh my god, that's the film. I was watching All the Colors of the Dark.
Oh wow!
And yeah, he had what tripped me out like later on in life that I didn't realize obviously when I was a kid is that he was actually watching a Spanish version of this film on VHS, and you know later as a collector, it tripped me out that he had this like Spanish version of All the Colors of the Dark. And meanwhile, I'm searching for this damn movie and I can't find it anywhere, you know. But I could attribute to that. I could attribute most of my personal. Like I love dark-haired women. I love satanic imagery in films. I love like all this weird stuff, and I feel like it all traces right back to that one film with Edwidge Fenech and all this craziness going on. And yeah, so it was. I think I must have been like 9 or 10 when I watched the film. And my uncle, of course, he didn't care. He was one of those uncles that you know he pretty much introduced me to a lot of stuff, and Giallo was fortunately and unfortunately one of those things. So
it cursed you for women for the rest of your life.
Pretty much, and it's crazy, but like I have this like deep-seated passion for all these different things, and then later on when I personally started discovering all these Italian films, I just stumbled upon All the Colors of the Dark. I think I had just an Italian version of the film, and everything just sort of came back to me. It was like, oh my god, that's the nightmarish dream in the beginning, and then oh my god, that's Edwidge Fenech, that's the girl, and then so everything sort of just came back. And I feel like personally that's just been like I've always wanted to collect these films and just learn more and more about them. So
well, we've been lucky in the last 10 years with the advent of DVD at the tail end. There were a few companies that decided to just take this genre and run and released so many of them, in a lot of really obscure ones. So fans of the genre or newcomers that could get into at least one or two of the films that we'll talk about tonight, there is a lot of it out there now because of the enthusiasts and because of DVDs that they can finally go out and seek these out on American soil. You know, a lot of companies are still releasing them on Blu-ray. Even Arrow's releasing a bunch of them. So tonight, what I want to do with this episode is not only kind of introduce you guys, those that don't know what Giallo film is or haven't watched a Giallo film, I want to introduce you guys to some cool starter movies for you to kind of dip your toes in to the waters. And then further down the line, I'll probably do another episode or two where we get in deep into some pretty deep cuts, and then we'll talk some more about it then. But tonight I kind of wanted to bring on my friends that I know are super into this, that'll give you some good movies to kind of, you know, wet that palate a little bit, because it's a really great genre that has dynamic music, beautiful cinematography, usually great gore, amazingly beautiful women, usually decent murder mysteries that for some reason at the very end turn into M. Night Shyamalan twistaroos that usually don't make a hell of a lot of fucking sense, but they're still kind of fun. I know Eric and we were talking about this. When you first saw the first switcheroo Giallo ending, Eric, what did you end up thinking about it?
Well, it's one of those things where it's completely baffling. I mean, some of these come way out of left field, but that's kind of the fun of all of it is going back to that idea. Like, so many of these have horrible, horrible plot holes, but they just play off like a crazy fever dream, and they're so cool to look at that it doesn't really matter, and you just go with it, and it's like, fine, that's how it happens.
A lot of them were made in the late 60s, early 70s, and by the time the 80s hit around, some of those later giallos turned more into slasher films.
Yes.
So
yeah.
they didn't have kind of the fun, beatniky kind of dream vibe that some of the early giallos had, where then in the 70s, like Brian was saying, when stuff like All the Colors of the Dark come out, they become really, really kind of weird acid dreams where they have satanic images in there, and that's when, you know, the advent of some of the slasher stuff started happening. If you were going to pick one favorite giallo before we get into our picks of what movies we want our listeners to go check out, what would be probably the quintessential giallo in your mind, Brian?
Mario Bava's Blood and Black Lace, simply because it's just such a beautiful, beautiful film.
A house of high fashion, a dazzling whirl of elegance, of exotic, extravagant beauties. An adventurous journey into the devastating allure of the most sophisticated women and their intimate secrets.
Suddenly, these lace curtains ignite a drama that will lacerate your emotions. Blood and Black Lace. Who is this shrouded, sadistic, sordid fiend who maims and murders? Why this bloodthirsty orgy, this holocaust of lives? Blood and Black Lace in bleeding color. A shattering, shivering, shocking experience.
Blood and Black Lace came out and really introduced all the true elements, like sort of the backbone of what Giallo actually became. And I think Dario Argento took those elements and has really amped them up into what I think people sort of recognize it as to this day. And incidentally, if you picked up the Arrow video one, it's the best that film has ever looked. So I think that if you're going into a film, like if you want to watch a really beautiful film with just murder and supermodels and all these crazy, and it's got a beautiful crazy twist ending as well, I would say the quintessential one would be Blood and Black Lace. But again, that sentiment could pretty much change in like the next. I could think of something else and be like, oh my god, I gotta say Deep Red or something. You know, like there's just so many of them.
Blood and Black Lace definitely is another one. Like when I started going down the rabbit hole of the Gialli, it was one that I kept seeing over and over and over again. And the thing that you first get hit with is the crazy use of color in that film. And if you're familiar with Bava at all, he's kind of the dude that, you know, Argento took a lot of cues from Bava.
Right.
And use of, you know, hard primary colors that are splashed all over the place. It's a beautiful, beautiful film. In the first film I'm going to bring, I'll start this out, boys. The first film I'm going to bring tonight that I think you guys should go check out of this genre is what's widely considered as the first Giallo made. It can be argued that the genre started with Hitchcock and Psycho and some other films like Peeping Tom and stuff like that. But when it's considered, most people talk about Italian Giallo cinema, they usually say that the first film is The Girl Who Knew Too Much by Mario Bava.
The supernatural powers of the evil eye claim still another victim. Its malevolent enjoyment of tantalizing torture hangs threateningly over John Saxon, Letitia Roman, and Valentina Cortese.
Oh, she was always against me. She hated me.
Madness and the maddening aura that destroys reason fills their every breath. with the smell of death.
Miss Dawson, have you ever seen a murder before?
No, I've never seen anything like that. Never.
Oh, stop playing games, will you, Longini? I don't know what you're trying to do, but I know that you're involved in this. Perhaps Nora has seen the killer. But how do we know that he hasn't seen her?
The evil eye, like relentless tides, reaches out for them. And they defiantly hold ecstasy and horror in their arms and touch lips with terror, while the evil eye watches their every kiss and invades their subconscious.
This film, to me, it's not as dark as some of the other films that we'll be talking about tonight. It's shot in black and white, but still, if you're familiar with any of Bava's subsequent work, it has a lot of the same calling cards, a lot beautiful cinematography, because we all know Bava started out as a cinematographer first for many, many years. And it has beautiful, stark, like hard contrast black and white photography with a lot of light slivers, great play on shadows, dynamic compositions within the frame, really fun beatnik music that gives the film not only kind of this, it has this dark gothic feeling because of the cinematography and because it's a murder mystery, but it gives it this kind of lighthearted tone that Bava would be known for in some of his subsequent work, because I think compared to some of the other directors that would come after him, and Argento is included in that, Bava always had a playfulness about his films where they dealt with dark subjects, but also kind of had their tongue in their cheek, and there was something super charming about all of his stuff. And The Girl Who Knew Too Much definitely plays that up to a T. It's a very fun film. It's very light. So if you're looking for something that is a good intro where you like Hitchcock and you like kind of just fun murder mysteries, Girl Who Knew Too Much, you'll jump right in and you'll dig it right away, because it's light. It's only about 85 minutes long. It's beautiful to look at. The lead actress is absolutely stunning. Letitia Roman, I believe her name is. Absolutely beautiful blonde. And, of course, one of my favorite actors of all time, Mr. John Saxon, is in there. Very early John Saxon. And what the movie's about is a U.S. tourist witnesses a murder and then finds herself caught up in a series of other killings that are based on the alphabet. And because she's a fan of Giallo books, she thinks she's a sleuth. So she's going to go and investigate these murders. And the further she goes, the more she starts to see that she's in the crosshairs. I love this film. I think it's super charming, and it has a lot of the hallmarks of the Giallo genre within it. Boys, have any of you guys seen this flick?
Of course.
Oh my God, yeah.
Long time. Yeah.
What are your general thoughts, Seth? What do you think of this one?
I think it's pretty much the perfect movie to start the Giallo movement early on. It's got the first, as far as I know, the first case of the American tourist being thrown into the murder mystery scene. It's got the, I don't want to say stereotypical, but the landmark stairs in Rome. They use all the big set pieces, well, not set pieces, but the city landmarks that so many other Gialli would take advantage of. Just beautiful scenery, beautifully shot. Just a really good place for the genre itself to start, and no better than with Bava.
Yeah,
made several fantastic films in the genre.
Yeah, it's a definitely, because of the setting, it is a gorgeous, gorgeous film. Eric?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. It's probably the best place anyone could really start to get introduced to the whole genre.
Brian, what do you think of this one?
I really love the film. I think that it's a film that it's easy to see, Bava's progression into the genre. I mean, he sort of expanded into multiple types of genre film, but I think that when you compare The Girl Who Knew Too Much to Blood and Black Lace, and then later going down the line to One on Top of the Other, and then Bay of Blood, I mean, you just see the progression from that film to to his later films. So I think that it's definitely a good starting point for somebody that wants to get into this particular genre of film. It's gorgeous. It's sort of like point A to, I have a hard time recommending it because it, like, later on, Giallo sort of became really known for its beautiful colors, and because it's black and white, a lot of people, I think somebody that comes in not knowing anything about the genre would ultimately look at a black and white film and just sort of be perplexed. So I think they would sort of miss the message of what the Girl Who Knew Too Much is really about, and all the little details that would later on become some of the hallmarks of Giallo are just all over the place. But yeah, definitely a great starting point.
Yeah, I think, if you can get past the fact that it is in black and white, it's still,
Right.
for some reason, somebody had colorized it, it would be at home with any of the subsequent films.
Right. Like, I think all of us understand that it is the starting point, but somebody that really doesn't know anything and they just think, oh my god, it's these sleazy movies and it's got black love killers and it's got ornate filters everywhere, like they'll just look at this film and be like, whoa, what is this? So I think because it's great. Like, Giallo is crazy. You see strip nude for your killer, and that's a Giallo, and then you see The Girl Who Knew Too Much, and that's a Giallo. So it's like, that's what's so beautiful about the genre. It's just so many different kinds. But yeah, definitely a great starting point.
Yeah, there's definitely a huge gap between strip nude for your killer and The Girl Who Knew Too Much. if you're familiar with New York Ripper, strip nude for your killer has a lot more to do with that than it does with this. But if you're a big fan of Hitchcock, I think Girl Who Knew Too Much is a perfect kind of like easing point into this genre. And then if you're a more hardcore sleaze fan, maybe some of these other films that we're going to bring to the table will be much more in line of a starting block for you. But I've always loved this film. I think it's super charming, super fun. So I'm going to move on. Eric, what is the movie you brought tonight?
The movie I brought tonight is actually, I feel like it's kind of picked up popularity lately a lot. The Perfume of the Lady in Black. It stars Mimsy Farmer, who also was in some other stuff like, I believe, More and Four Eye Flies on Grey Velvet. The reason why I was bringing it to the table is it's just really batshit crazy. The story starts out, simple enough. This girl's a scientist, and just all this really weird dreamlike stuff starts happening to her throughout the entire film. And the soundtrack is pretty cool, really well used and executed. I think it's a really fun film.
Yeah, it's also another one of these where the visuals are pretty crazy, and it has this really dreamlike atmosphere about it. Brian, what do you think of this one?
Oh, I love it. I love, it also has that cult atmosphere in it.
Yeah.
Raro Video just came out with a beautiful Blu-ray transfer of the film. And Mimsy Farmer, I think she's one of those unsung leading actresses. She's been in a lot of these Gialli, and she's never really. You always hear the Edwidge Fenechs or the Barbara Bouchers, but you never hear about Mimsy Farmer. So
no, yeah, and I
think,
I love when she's on screen. I mean, I don't know, she's just great to look at, really charismatic, and
she's great in Four Flies and
the Black Cat. She's good in the Black Cat.
Yeah, I forgot about that one.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love that film as well. It's definitely one of those Giallo films that sort of reaches for other elements. Not just like the typical Giallo archetypes. It goes for so much more in that film. So definitely love it.
I think one of the interesting things about it too is like it's got just a lot of weird, quirky characters, which seems to be a really big theme with Giallos, because they always like to try throwing you off the trail constantly with just these bizarre people who might only be interjected for a scene, and so it's kind of fun that way too.
Right, and because because once you watch one or two of these, you kind of get the hint that anybody can be the killer, and it usually is somebody who is only on screen for like 10 seconds. A lot of these films did just introduce characters willy-nilly, and all of them are suspect because they're all so fucking weird. Seth, have you seen this one?
Yeah, I think Mimsy Farmer really does a good job carrying that movie with her. I think her acting is a little bit above the Edwidge Fenechs and Barbara Bouchers. She might not be quite the eye candy that they are, but I think she does a really good job emoting better than they do. And like Brian said, it does bring that cult atmosphere to it, where you're not quite sure who's in on the story and who's not. And of course, the 7,000 red herrings they throw at us.
That is definitely a huge device within Giallo film. What do you think it is about the 1.5 million red herrings, Brian? I mean, it seems to be a huge staple of this genre. I know not all of the films go absolutely batshit crazy with all of the weird red herrings and stuff like that. What do you think it is about this element of the film? Is it just kind of like the usual Italian sensibility, where in most of their exploitation films they just decide to take things that much further than most of the other, like the U.S. films?
Yeah, I think when you're talking about these films in particular, like you touched upon with The Girl Who Knew Too Much, it already introduced all these different mysteries. And when you look at an American film, like there's a lot of American films that you can sort of correlate back to Giallo, but they're not really called Giallo. There's some of them that sort of creep up to the edge of what a Giallo is. I think that classic Italian films just sort of you're coming from a place of mystery anyway. After the peak is basically in the early 70s into the mid 70s. Everybody's sort of competing with each other, and then they come out with all these outlandish topics. So it's just like any other genre. You exhaust all these different elements, and then you start coming up with just brand new, crazy, off-the-wall elements, and it just adds to the character of all these films. At least that's what I think. I think when certain films come out and they don't necessarily create a genre, then they sort of remain what they are. But when you come out with Bird with the Crystal Plumage, and that movie sort of made a lot. When it came out, everybody's trying to replicate that certain the feeling of what that film conveyed, and then everybody's trying to do something. Like when you look at Fulci's earlier Giallo films, they're so much different from the later ones. Obviously, after in the 80s, you've exhausted all these different elements and ideas, and you're just coming up with all these crazy stuff that it makes it. I feel like it makes it seem sleazy, but it's just like when you've done the same thing over and over, you have to try something different, and sometimes you sacrifice logic when it comes to trying to find new and different exciting ideas.
Well, I mean, I'd even go so far as to say, like, I feel like the big difference between this and kind of like the American films that might toe the line with Giallo is you can tell like these filmmakers just have a ton of fun doing what they're doing, and that's probably where a lot of the kind of like artsy camera moves or lighting or things kind of come from too, is they're just not afraid to like do whatever and try things on set, and the films just have that fun feel to them, which I think sets them apart from, anything else really.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think there was definitely a freedom on those sets to try what they wanted to try.
Well, a lot of the Italian subgenres of exploitation back in the day, they didn't have the studio influence. They didn't have people trying to mold them into something that was super marketable. They were being sold on the sleaze factor and on how ridiculous they were. And I mean, the titles alone kind of tell you, how far they wanted to push this stuff. I mean, what the hell, 4 Flies on Gray Velvet? What the fuck does that mean? Or the perfume of the Lady in Black? I mean, these titles are fucking insane. Let's say some more titles of these because they're so fun to fucking say. The Killer reserved 9 seats.
Yeah.
The House with Laughing Windows.
Yep. And,
your vice is a locked door and only I have the key.
That's one of my favorites. I love that title, man. Absolutely love that title. But the Iguana with the Tongue of Fire. Have you guys ever seen that one?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So moving on, another ridiculous title is about to hit us right now. Mr. Seth Paulin, what is the film you decided to bring tonight?
I brought The Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward from 1971. Directed by Sergio Martino, starring the gorgeous Edwidge Fenwick, who is not going to be a stranger to this series of podcast episodes.
No.
And she's basically trapped in a kind of romantic triangle of lovers with her husband that bores her, a ex who is pretty maniacal and crazy, played by Ivan Rassimov, who is just fantastic as a villain. And then her suave lover, George, played by George Hilton, who is a perfect suave lover. And there's just a series of sex murders going around, and everyone she comes in contact with ends up dead as she receives bouquets of flowers with weird, obscene poetry. And we'll see if she can survive before, or find out the identity of the killer before she gets the razor from the black glove. It's pretty textbook Giallo when you get all the genre tropes in there. Everything's in there, and it's really, really well done. Martino's direction is really deliberate and fluent and beautiful. And Nora Orlandi did the score. She might be familiar to some Quentin Tarantino fans because he took a song from this and put it in Kill Bill 2.
Very famous song.
Yeah. I'm not going to try and pronounce it.
Yeah, I'm not about to do it. Brian, can you pronounce it?
Oh, God. If the Baron was here, you definitely could, but I'm not good with it.
Martino's a great director. That's a name that you'll see quite a bit.
Torso.
Yeah, you could argue he's one of the 2 or 3 kings of the genre.
Torso is more on it's more of the sleazier end.
I was gonna say he's almost one of the directors that probably inspired more like the American slasher movement too, to be honest.
Right.
Because he definitely had some extra sleaze in a lot of his films.
Right. I mean, if anybody that's familiar with Sergio Martino, he would go on to make an Astro Radio Z favorite, Mountain of the Cannibal God, Man Called Blade. He also made the amazingly titled Your Vice is a Locked Room and I Only Have the Key. I have the key. I can't even say it right now.
Which they put that title in one of the poems that she gets in the.
Yeah.
He made some really great. Another great one that he made, which I would lump more with some of the earlier giallos that were a little tamer than what he would make almost directly after. Is the case of the Scorpion's Tail. Is much more like A Bird with a Crystal Plumage. It's much more like that. If you're into that style of murder mystery where it's a little more straight-laced, more of a procedural, mixed with some of the, fantastic colored visuals and crazy music, it's kind of a good middle ground film. But then almost immediately afterward, he started making some really, really crazy stuff. Brian, what do you think of this flick?
Oh my God, Martino is one of my favorites. I mean, one of the earlier ones that I watched was All the Colors of the Dark. I would also add that Martino is one of the few, and probably the only one that really made some real traditional Giallo films. Just like, for example, The Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward is, if you're going to just bring in somebody blind to the genre, that's a perfect film to introduce to the person because, like Seth said, it's got all the elements there, and it's awesome because it's like Edwidge and George sort of like work together, again in All the Colors of the Dark, and it's amongst my favorites. People always, look at that as like, one of the absolute best Giallo films ever made. But I think they look at it because it's got all the perfect elements of what Giallo is. You can pretty much bring your checklist along while you're watching the film and literally check off every single element. But not only that, it's a great film. It's from beginning to end, and it's got that great twist that I personally didn't really see coming the first time I watched it.
Not at all.
Yeah, great film. It's one of the few. I shouldn't say one of the few. It's one of the films that does the twist like perfectly.
Would you basically say if you were going to do the top 3 Giallo directors, it would probably be Bava Argento and Martino?
I would almost put like Martino because I feel like he was just like the guy. Like you want a good Giallo, Martino's going to give you a good Giallo. Like, you want a crazy fucking, like, oh my, what the hell am I watching? Argento's going to give you that. You want just a beautiful cinematic experience, I think Bava's going to give you that. If you want just what Giallo really is, Martino, I think, would be probably the best example of what, like a textbook Giallo. I think Martino, and unfortunately it's like, Argento, Bava, Fulci, and Martino's hardly ever, discussed. So because of that, I would probably throw Martino out at, number 1. And I know that's a little controversial to say, but I would definitely put Martino on top. If we're going to talk like,
I would not disagree with you.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. Like, trying to bring together all the elements of what the genre is supposed to be. Martino perfectly displays that in all of his films. It's the other stuff, they kind of take it elsewhere, walk with it. It's a bit more eye candy here and there, but to be just truly classic, that's kind of where Martino's films really hit home.
Right.
Yeah, right. He made a lot of what now is considered kind of the staple of films, and we listed off a bunch of them. But like the Case of the Bloody Iris is another one.
Yeah.
And What Have You Done to Solange?
Oh my God.
Very classic film. Very, very classic film. So Sergio Martino is definitely a name to write down. In this film in particular, before we move on to let's talk about Edwidge Fenech.
How much time do we have?
If you're a red-blooded man or a woman that's the lover of ladies, I would find it very difficult for you to not instantly fall in love with her. She is one of the most beautiful specimens of a female ever. Ever. And she's in tons of these movies, and she's very sexy and mostly nude, if not fully nude, in almost all of them. So I understand why Brian is obsessed with women that look just like her, because she is a striking woman, and she's always shot very provocatively in all of these films.
But it's all in the eyes, though.
Yes. She has very striking and beautiful eyes, and it's the way that it's shot, because it's all shot very stylistically. They focus on her eyes quite a bit.
Yeah,
and I would also say that that's one of the misconceptions, is that everybody says that she's in all these different Giallo films, but she's only really done a handful of them, and then she sort of like segued into like Italian sex comedies.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people looking from the outside in just sort of mix all of them as like, oh, they're the sleazy films, that's what she's in, and Giallo so happens to be probably her top shelf genre that she worked in, although some would probably argue that's not necessarily top shelf. Like she's been in some really iconic films, but I wouldn't say that she was in a lot of these films necessarily, but she's definitely one of the most memorable leading ladies.
Well, she was in some that were some of the more very striking films in the genre. Like we had said before, Strip Nude for Your Killer. She's in that. She's in the Red Queen series, which I would highly recommend. I know Seth was saying that they're releasing that on Blu-ray coming soon.
Yeah.
May, I think.
I would check that out. They had a release of a box set in which it had the actual Red Queen as a doll included with the films. Seth actually showed that he picked it up, and I was quite jealous of this. He showed me this. But she was also in one of Baba's later films, $5 for an August Moon, which isn't a very good Giallo, but it's a Giallo nonetheless.
It's such a stylish film, like granted it doesn't necessarily hold water to most of Baba's films, but it's if you watch it with the sound off, it's a beautiful looking film.
The interior sets on that are incredible.
Yeah.
That house is gorgeous.
Well, speaking of Edwidge Fenech, let's go to the last film of the night, Mr. Brian Martinez. What is the film you decided to bring in for the folks?
Actually, I did like a late game change.
Oh, he red herringed us.
He originally was going to bring All the Colors of the Dark. What did you do?
I mean, I could talk about All the Colors of the Dark, but as far as like introducing somebody to because I think All the Colors of the Dark is a great film, but to me it's a personal film. I don't necessarily think that somebody coming in cold will look at All the Colors of the Dark and just be like, oh, I gotta, maybe it might inspire them to watch more of these, Gialli, but I would personally recommend Death Walks on High Heels.
I want to know who shot him.
But I only heard footsteps, I'll tell you. A woman's. It was a woman's, I think.
He thinks I have those diamonds. He says he'll kill me if I don't tell him where they are.
That Englishman killed her, if you want to know.
I regret to say that your accusation is erroneous. You see, Dr. Matthews couldn't have done it, as he was shot last night.
It might have been anyone. Even you.
You're after her killer. How amazing you should care when the stupid bitch nearly murdered the man who was keeping her.
It's a good film. It's a good mystery film that weaves a lot of intrigue and suspense without necessarily being full Giallo. You know, it definitely has a lot of the Giallo elements in it. You know, you have a black glove killer with a blade, and it's got some of these red herrings in there, you know, left and right, and sometimes like you guys were saying, one too many. Because it literally switches things up. I don't want to give any spoilers, but it literally keeps on going all the way to the end. But it's one of those films that's shot beautifully. The story is really cohesive. You know, it has to do with a jewel thief, and basically the motive of the entire film is they're just trying to retrieve these jewels, and so it almost becomes like a literal murder mystery. And I think it's more akin to some of the old Mondadori novels that were published. So I think it's sort of like a nice film that skirts the edge of Giallo. Although I do believe it's definitely a Giallo. But I think it's a good film. Like if somebody wants to dip their big toe in the pool of Giallo, which would be red, incidentally, I think Death Walks on High Heels. I think Death Walks on High Heels is that perfect film, because it would, I think, unfortunately, you know, the mainstream doesn't really look at these films as like, oh my God, these are some great pieces of work, you know, unless we're talking about Argento or whatever. So I think Death Walks on High Heels is one of those films that somebody that doesn't know about these films could literally walk in, watch, really enjoy it, and then sort of have that street cred that, you know, this is one of the more obscure ones that isn't necessarily brought up into discussions, and then sort of delve further into the genre.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one, because I think if any of the films tonight, I think this is kind of like The Girl Who Knew Too Much, where it's shot a little more traditionally, and it has the weirder elements to it, but is far more accessible than the vast majority of kind of the more strange, you know, kind of surreal giallos that the genre is typified with, you know. So this is a great starting block for the genre.
And you're right. I mean, for anybody just starting with the genre, it is a really great kind of like bragging rights movie because Luciano Ercole just gets overlooked, I feel like, quite a bit because he didn't do a whole lot, but the output that he did do is really phenomenal. I mean, they're shot really well and soundtrack's awesome. So
all quality films from him.
Yeah, both of the High Heels movies are quite good.
Yeah, and I mean, luckily, Arrow just put those out on Blu-ray, so there's really nice HD transfers of them both, too. So
yeah, definitely. And so many features.
You don't have to spend $100 on them anymore from the No Shame DVDs.
No.
If you like the first one, I would definitely recommend checking out the second one. And in the second one, the killer wears an iron spiked glove as the murder weapon. And it's awesome.
It is awesome.
Yeah, I feel like the second one, Death Walks at Midnight, is it sort of spirals into that sort of like craziness, you know. So I think Death Walks on High Heels is the more tame of the two, but it's not taking anything away from Midnight because I feel like that one is an amazing film as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good. I think that's a good stepping stone, like the High Heels and then the Midnight. I think that's a good way to kind of jump into the pool, you know, because once you, if you're good with the second film, then you're going to be good with the vast majority of this stuff.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
I really love all the movies that you guys brought tonight because it's kind of tough to just like summarize what makes these films so great without actually seeing them. I hope you guys, listeners, got something out of this that you can go and try and seek these out. Because if you're a fan of Eurosleaze, you're a fan of Argento, which is one of the bigger names out there, I think that you have a good reference as to you'll probably like these kind of films. Because if you're into that kind of stuff, a lot of the calling cards of Argento's earlier career with Suspiria and Deep Red are throughout all of this. So I would totally recommend going to this. If you're not into that kind of stuff, do not watch these movies. You probably will not like them. As much as I said that there are elements, obviously, of Hitchcock that runs through a lot of this stuff, these films are far too weird for the vast majority of people.
But we say that lovingly, though. I said we say that lovingly.
Well, yeah.
They're weird, but...
Well, that's what makes them so fun, though, is that you don't know what's going to happen. You're watching what, for all intents and purposes, is a pretty straightforward like murder mystery, but it's done in such a weird style that you don't know what the fuck is going to happen at any point in it. And then all of a sudden there's hyper-violence, there's some beautiful naked chicks, and some crazy-ass music going on, and it's just it's so out there that it takes a very specific taste to get into this stuff. So if you're into hyper-stylized stuff, you'll probably get into this genre pretty well. Now, before we wrap this up, one of the big things that I love about Giallo films are the soundtracks. Now, I would love for you guys, I'm obviously going to play some Giallo music throughout the episode here, but I would love if you guys off the top of your heads knew any good Giallo soundtracks to point the listeners to. Brian, do you have any?
You know, I would have to say anything Morricone touches, and especially because he won the Oscar this year. I feel like he's a great starting point. You know, I love Bruno. Personally, my favorite is Bruno Nicolai's All the Colors of the Dark for personal reasons. But I would start with Morricone and then work your way into all these amazing... I mean, you can go from Morricone to Goblin. It's just like night and day. But I think Morricone is just such a smooth, beautiful, composer of these films. So...
Bruno Nicolai, it may be my favorite composer of any of this stuff.
Yeah.
He did a lot more of the traditional kind of Giallo soundtrack that you would become accustomed to in the early 70s, in the late 60s, early 70s, which is kind of that weird beatnik jazz type music that you would see in lounges, you would hear in lounges and stuff like that, and it makes the films really fun, and they're actually quite fun to sit and listen to. Eric, is there any that you really get into?
Obviously, this is where Goblin got their huge start, working with Argento on a lot of stuff. So if you're familiar with that band, you'll definitely recognize like a lot of soundtracks to Argento's work. And obviously, Goblin has created a huge stepping stone for progressive rock. I mean, they're even influencing bands like Zombie today. So they really made a benchmark in kind of the whole Giallo genre.
Seth?
I think anything Riz Ortolani touched was pretty much gold. He did a lot of like jazzy club music for the Giallo films and Euro crime genre, but also his spaghetti western soundtracks rivaled Morricone's, and just a fantastic, I guess, outside of the Euro horror or Euro cult scene, he's really not respected too much or talked about too much. So I think giving him a chance would be a good use of everybody's time.
That's the great thing about some of these composers, is that they did straddle the line of not only the Giallo, but they also did spaghetti westerns, which is another genre that I'm going to probably do a few episodes on, because I'm also a huge fan of spaghetti westerns. But yeah, Riz's stuff is really great. Him and Nicolai, two of my favorites for sure, and of course Goblin.
Absolutely.
Oh, Bobby O'Frisbee. Did we bring up him?
No, we did not bring up him.
Okay, yeah, he's fantastic too.
Why don't you set that one up? Why don't you start off?
I'm trying to place like what a really good Giallo-oriented film, would be that he worked on. But I know he worked a lot with Fulci. Obviously, he's probably most famous for his soundtrack to The Beyond. But he's got his fingers in a lot of Italian soundtracks that are just absolutely fantastic. So
I'll throw out Stelvio Cipriani, who did, among others, he did what the films that Brian brought to the table. The Death Walks movies, those are fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
He also did Iguana with the Tongue of Fire.
Yeah.
Some trashy Nazi exploitation movies, and plenty of other good stuff. He's great too.
In general, if you're a fan of any Italian horror or Italian subgenre, you're going to be a fan of most of the other films that we're dropping left and right, and all of these guys, because they all kind of have that same go for broke sensibility about them. So I hope you guys got something out of this episode. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you go out there and start watching some Giallo or some Gialli, which is, Brian, is that the proper plural term of the Giallo?
Yeah, so the proper plural term for Giallo is Gialli, which is a little unfortunate because jolly sounds like you're having a jolly old time, which you can be. But yeah, so multiple Giallo films would be considered Gialli, and then the world of Giallo, it would just be Giallo.
I'm glad this point was brought up. That is a pet peeve that gets under my skin.
Oh my God, me too, Seth. And it's like I don't blame people because like we discussed, Giallo isn't necessarily one of those genre. I mean, it is getting a lot of great releases these days, but often when you hear when you're searching for these things, you hear people say, all these great Giallos, and it's just like, oh my God, it's jolly,
Yeah.
But
it's almost a snobby thing to be mad about, but
right.
Well, you gotta put the awareness out there somehow. Now comes the self-shilling portion of this shindig where we tell you where we can find each of us if you would like to do so. Seth, why don't you tell the fine listeners where they can find you?
You can find me at celluloidterror.blogspot.com and Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Celluloid Terror. All sorts of horror and cult film reviews and film talk and bitching and moaning.
There is an awful lot of that on the internet nowadays. Eric?
Currently, I started a music podcast, Ertrock Radio Hour. It's ERTROK Radio Hour. I'm on Facebook, iTunes. You can put me in a Google search engine and find a website too. So,
Brian,
did you allot a good half an hour for this? Because I got a bunch of them.
Try to be concise, Brian.
I run the Giallo Films page on Facebook. I also run the Giallo Room with Baron Martino. You could find the YouTube channel. Just search the Giallo Room. Also, we're starting production on a brand new. Since this is Giallo, I figured bring some Giallo stuff. We're starting production on a brand new Giallo web series that hopefully will be released in the fall, called the Demon Kills in White. So look out for that. And if you want to find me on Facebook, friend me up, and we'll talk some Giallo and demons.
Well, hopefully soon enough we'll have that epic demons episode we've been teasing about.
All 36 parts.
All 36 parts of that demons episode. we've been talking about. So I thank you guys for coming on tonight, big time. And I think the next one I'll bring you cats on here again, and we'll talk some more. We'll talk some of the more weird films of the genre. Hopefully, people will care enough to want to hear about it. If not, I don't care. I just want to hear about some films that I haven't seen yet. So As always, I'm your host, Derek Carey. You can find Astro Radio Z at astroradios.com. You can contact me on Twitter, on Facebook, at Astro Radio Z, or you can email me at astroradiozpodcast@gmail.com. You can subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, TuneIn, YouTube, all these different places. Anywhere where you can find podcasts, you can find Astro Radio Z. So why don't you go there, subscribe, share us to your friends, give us a 5-star rating, please. Please, I'm begging of you. Help us out. I don't care. If you want to rate the show, I appreciate it highly. I'm very thankful for all the new listeners that have been coming on and saying some really kind things about the show. I'm glad you guys are digging it. It's what's keeping me going, doing a weekly podcast. So thank you. Keep getting back to me. Keep listening. And until then, grazie and ciao.